Phillip De Wet, who writes about international stuff for News 24, has a column at the moment which argues that South Africa should cut its close embrace with Iran and that China would understand, and entirely independent of the column, I think related to a throwaway remark I might have made earlier from Damon. I get this WhatsApp. This is not rhetorical. What is the real reason, in your opinion, for South Africa's close alliance/friendship with Iran? Philip, what would your answer be to that? Good afternoon.
Hello, John. Basically none. I mean, there is no longer any justification to be an ally or be associated with Iran in any way, shape, or form. There's no profit to be made from it in the long term
But
or the short
it
term.
exists, and it has existed for a while. Why? Why has South Africa allied itself with a government which the treatment of the treatment of, by that government of Iranian people has been known for a long time?
I suspect it hasn't been that bad up to now, is the simple answer to that. Look, there are the historic ties there, and there is South Africa's broader philosophical search for kind of non-alignment. Iran was, I would argue no longer is, but certainly was quite an influential force in the world. Its access to oil, its positioning in the Middle East and its large military made it a potential player, and South Africa was very interested in being close to other major players that weren't aligned with the West. Then, of course, now, I mean, it is now a member of BRICS Plus. It is very much within the orbit of Russia and China, and that means that South Africa kind of wants to stay close. But everything has changed literally in the last couple of weeks, I think. There is now no prospect that Iran can ever be rehabilitated in terms of its economic power. So Iran cannot be a source of oil. It'll be virtually impossible to get oil from Iran to South Africa, or processed fuel products. The South African investments made in Iran are lost. You can write those off. And we can see the trajectory here in terms of the level of violence that the theocracy is willing to use. The revolution will come, or the counter-revolution will come. Will it come today or tomorrow? We don't know. It will come. That regime will fall, and that fall will likely be quite a bloody one. This is not something South Africa wants to be involved in or anywhere near. And in fact, if you're being pragmatic, you want to position yourself now for the post-revolutionary regime. That's where you want to be. You don't want to be a friend of the current
whatever
one.
that is going to be, and there's no guarantee that that is going to be more human rights centered than the regime at the moment. I mean, it's clear, given. Well, I think it's clear, in as much as anything that Cyril Ramaphosa does is clear, that he is aware of the dangers of the kind of close alignment which a joint military exercise indicates. There's this thing that we still don't fully understand about the Iranian Navy taking part in, despite it appears strict instructions that they should not be allowed to. Some people are now telling me that China was in charge and China said the Iranians are staying in this exercise and South Africa doesn't have the wherewithal to say no to China. Your article argues that China will understand if South Africa distances itself from Iran.
China has no time for any human rights arguments around China. You can't talk as an ally of China, as someone who wants to do business with China. You don't get to talk about China. You do, however, get to have your quirks and your peculiarities as an ally. China can be quite forgiving of those. And it considers a human rights focused external policy to be one such. In other words, China doesn't care what happens within the countries that it does business with. It has actively adopted this posture to say, we are not going to police human rights among our partners. We're not going to look at their internal conduct. We're going to have an arm's length relationship with them. So China will continue doing business with Iran, regardless of how bloody the regime gets its hand. On the other hand, if South Africa comes to China and goes, we do have a human rights focus, this is embedded in our very DNA, we can no longer be part of this, I do think South Africa will get a sympathetic hearing. It certainly won't get laughed out of Beijing if it puts that forward. So, the risk here is really on the Russian side, that Russia will be extremely annoyed by this posture. But the potential benefit, I think, significantly outweighs that for South Africa on the international stage.
Thank you very much. Phillip De Wet is with News 24, their foreign affairs editor.